Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to talk about the Portland Trail Blazers in today's video as we focus on an offseason preview. This has been a heavily requested video, something that a lot of Blazers fans and just fans of the NBA in general on the channel have wanted to see, so I'm really excited to cover them. Again, if you do enjoy the consistent uploads and the work I put into these videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And let's jump into that Portland Trail Blazers offseason now with a video preview. First, we're going to look at this past year, the 2023-2024 season recap. It is the best place to start with all of these offseason previews. We need to take a good long look at where this team just was, where they're really headed, to get a good idea of how this offseason could or should play out for this organization. Then we'll also look at the 2024 NBA draft. We'll analyze which picks the Blazers have in this year's class, and then also some draft prospects, some targets that I think really could make some good deal of sense for Portland to add into the fray there. Then we'll look at their 2024 NBA free agency situation, the cap space that they have, which targets could theoretically make some sense, or maybe which targets they shouldn't even go after given their cap space situation. Portland's in, I think, a pretty surprising situation financially, despite how bad their team was, unfortunately, this past year. They have a lot of money committed, so we'll talk about that and how that kind of shapes their free agency. We'll also look at potential off-season trades, and I think that's really where the going gets tough here for Portland, is not only what players do you add in the draft, but who do you shuffle around. You've got some really valuable contracts. You've got some players who could help real contenders in the NBA. Do you look at selling them off this offseason? How does Joe Cronin and company there in that front office look to operate this offseason? I think that's going to be a very important question. And then we'll give an early outlook for next year. Do I think the Blazers are going to take a big step forward? Do I think they'll stay about the same? What are my expectations for Portland going into next season? But again, I'm very excited for this video. Blazers fans, I hope you are as well. And now let's recap this past season. The Blazers finished with a 21-61 record, so they were not super competitive. And I think most of us knew that was going to happen after trading away Damian Lillard. They landed Drew Holiday and Robert Williams in separate packages. Obviously got Drew Holiday from Milwaukee, then traded him to Boston for Robert Williams and Malcolm Brogdon. They brought in some veteran players. Robert Williams got hurt very early on into the season. I believe he only played 6 games for the Blazers this year before his season-ending injury, which is very unfortunate. For the most part, I do think that Portland made smart moves last year, but it was pretty obvious and telling that this year would be a beginning of the rebuild type of year. And usually the first year of a rebuild is always the toughest because you don't have a ton of young players to cheer for. Now, Portland has some, and we'll talk about that here as well, with Anfernee Simons really taking another big step forward. I still think that, a couple of years ago I was saying he was not the right backcourt pairing with Damian Lillard to maximize the two of them. I thought that they needed a bigger defensive-oriented guard, and I still feel very validated in that opinion. But the one positive of having a talented player like Anfernee Simons is, in the event that Damian Lillard wanted out, which he ultimately did, you have a guy who can go get you a bucket. He is a really talented shot creator, a very adept three-point shooter. I think one of the things that really impresses me every time I turn on the Blazers and watch their games, which is pretty frequently, by the way. I love watching Portland, and especially since they're on the West Coast, I was able to see a ton of them this year after I've already watched other games that day. Portland, to me specifically with Simons, just his ability to step into pull-up jump shots, pull-up threes, pull-up twos, just an impressive shot maker, an impressive shot diet. He has a star player shot diet, and he shot pretty well on those types of shots. So there's still a lot for Anfernee Simons, I think, to unlock in his game, especially as a playmaker, facilitator. Can he be a 1A on a championship level team? I think we all know the answer to that is no. But one thing I will say is he has still a lot of potential to grow into. He's still relatively young, and I think there is a lot to work with in his overall game, and he already has the scoring gravity to become a dynamic threat as a 25-8 type of guy. Now, if he can just up his facilitating, and I think Portland putting better players around him over the next couple of years could definitely help that as well, putting more shooting gravity, more scoring gravity around him. Scoot Henderson is another player who just needs more scoring gravity, more shooting gravity around him. I think Scoot Henderson really impressed me this year. I got to see him live in person a couple of times. Also, just watching him throughout the year. I know people are going to point to the field goal percentage. They're going to point to the three-point percentage. They're going to point to the turnovers. They're going to see a lot of the flaws. Some of the things I see, he averaged over 5 assists per game as a rookie. I think his floor general ability, I think his reads as a rookie point guard was pretty impressive to me. I also think that with the amount of talent Portland had, it's pretty surprising he was able to get 5 assists per game. He's passing to centers like Duop, Reith. Like, the talent there in Portland just isn't comparable to some of the other young players around the league. Obviously, some of the top guys like Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, they're also playing in tough situations. Don't get me wrong, but I think Scoot Henderson specifically, with how the Blazers kind of tanked to end the year as well, just didn't have a lot of real talent around him. But at the end of the year, we started to see some real flashes from Scoot as well, with some really great scoring nights. That was something that was few and far between as a rookie. But he's also a young, smaller point guard. That is going to be one of the biggest challenges coming into the NBA, is being a point guard and adjusting to the NBA game. It's a completely different game. I know people are going to reference saying, oh, he's playing at G League Ignite. That doesn't really mean anything. Even though you're playing in the G League, playing against other professional basketball players, you're not playing against real consistent true NBA talent night in, night out. You're not playing in the most consistent true NBA scheme night in, night out, especially for the G League Ignite program, which is now retired and gone. Scoot Henderson still had a lot to learn coming in. And I think he took a big step forward by the end of the season, and I think he's going to build on that in year 2, year 3. Don't give up hope in Scoot Henderson. I think he's going to be a fantastic player still. I do not regret where I had him on my board at all. I think there's a lot of potential for him to still grow into. Watching him in person was an absolute blast. The way he moves, the way he carries himself on the floor. I think he's going to turn into a very, very, very awesome player. I stand by my pre-draft evaluation on him because I feel very confident in what he's going to blossom into as a point guard in this league. Jerami Grant, DeAndre Ayton, 2 high-value contracts, or not high-value, high-cost contracts with kind of mixed results. Now, Jerami Grant shot the ball really, really well this year again, shot over 40% from 3. For me, still a little bit of an empty calorie, empty number kind of guy, which I know is not really fair analysis. It's not his fault that Portland isn't good, but I think if you look throughout his career, his impact on winning hasn't been as stark or as severe as most people would expect it to be. He's not a great rebounder for his position. I do think long-term, if Portland were to move off of him, they would not get any worse. I don't think they would have trouble getting better in the future after making that decision either. Now, it's not to say he's not a good player. I think he can be a quality role player, but for the cost that Portland has him on, he's just not going to be a foundational cornerstone piece to an organization. I think everybody here knows that. They are paying him a lot of money. He put up some numbers for them this year. We'll see. We'll talk about him later in the trade section, though. DeAndre Ayton obviously was one of their big gets in the Damian Lillard deal. Brought him in a multi-team deal from Phoenix. Had to send out Yusuf Nurkic. In a vacuum, I still like that decision for Portland. You got younger, you got a little bit more scoring gravity with DeAndre Ayton now. If he could really harness his play to get to the rim more, draw more fouls, and really exercise some of his physical dominance, he would be an even better player. He does like that turnaround fade, though. He likes his little 15-foot jump shots. For me, if he could just turn into more of a physically assertive player, I think he would be way, way better and could really be a core piece for this Blazers team. Right now, I think it's fine having him. I don't think there's any flaw with him being on the roster. Portland has a few young players that maybe if things turn right or if they just find the right rhythm in their career, they could take a big, meaningful step forward. Maybe Ayton's one of those guys. That's the one thing with a player as talented as DeAndre Ayton. It's really a play style shift that I think would really maximize him. That's a hard thing to get out of some of these players. Think about Ayton, who's already been maxed. He looks at himself as a max player, which means he probably doesn't view himself as someone who needs to improve a ton. The issue is he does. He does need to take some meaningful steps forward. So getting that playstyle change is going to be difficult, but I think if Portland ever gets that out of him, they could really maximize him into a player that could be, you know, an 18 and 12 type of guy very, very, very consistently on a winning team. And that's really where you would find the real value in the contract you have him on now. Shaedon Sharpe, kind of a disappointing year just from an injury standpoint, wasn't on the floor a ton. And wasn't as successful as we're used to seeing Shaedon Sharpe be. His rookie season, I think there was a lot of excitement, a lot of hype. Sophomore year, you know, kind of started out slow, dealt with some injuries. I'm not going to put any stock in it, to be completely honest with you. I still think Shaedon Sharpe's going to be a fantastic player. I think he's going to turn into a very key piece of this Blazers rebuild that has a ton of guards already. Very evidently with Simon, Scoot, and Sharpe, you've got 3 athletic guards. You've got the shot-making profile you want from Simons. You've got the playmaking feel from Scoot. You've got the downhill rim attack, the lob presence, the vertical aerial assault that is Shaedon Sharpe. And then I want to highlight Delano Banton as well. I liked him as a signing for the Boston Celtics, who are now in the NBA Finals, when they signed him, but he never really got any run there, and obviously there's good reason for that. The Celtics are one of the best teams in the NBA, if not the best team. They just didn't have the minutes to give Delano Banton. Portland did, though, and they got him at the trade deadline for very, 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 very cheap, basically a salary dump. So Delano Banton got some minutes, got some real run in the second half of the season, and impressed. He had a very, very good short tenure with Portland. I think he will be an important piece for them moving forward. Yes, another guard. He was an interesting player for me to evaluate even back coming out of college. Has a lot of raw athleticism, size, and again, some of that downhill attack in his game. Now, I just think for him, it's continually improving as a shooter, continuing to improve his handle and downhill decision making, because with the size that he has and the rim pressure he can put on, if he can just continue to blossom as a facilitator, there is a real role in this league for Delano Banton. It's not going to be a superstar, but he could be a quality contributor off the bench most likely on this Blazers team. And the reality is this team is just really, really young for the most part and really bad. They're playing some really bad centers. They're getting killed on the glass some nights. They're getting just destroyed defensively. I feel bad for Chauncey Billups because I feel like he envisioned himself being a defensive-minded coach, and in his coaching tenure so far, he hasn't had any good defensive players really. So, obviously Matisse Thybulle's there, right? But for the most part, this Blazers team has not been equipped with guys who are going to help build out a good defensive system and scheme. And the reality is I'm just not sure Chauncey Billups is going to be the long-term coach there in Portland, which is completely okay. Even if he's coaching for the next year or two, it doesn't mean he's going to be the long-term guy, the long-term head coaching figure there for the Blazers. But I do think ultimately he hasn't been given a roster that has been really ready to compete. So I'm not vindicating him. I'm also not sitting here saying that he's going to be the best long-term guy for the position. I'm also just not saying it's all his fault either. I think there's just both sides of the coin can be true, that he's not probably the best long-term head coach, but at the same time, with a rebuilding roster, a young, not quality roster, the team's just not really ready to compete at this point in time anyway. So when we look at the 2024 NBA draft, they do own picks number 7, 14, 34, and 40 in this year's draft. Now, having 4 picks in one draft is kind of difficult for a roster to handle, because at most you can have 18 players on your roster, 3 two-way guys, 15 standard NBA contracts. So this is about 25% of your roster if you include two-way contracts into it. And picks 34 and 40 probably would be two-way guys. So Portland, who already had multiple picks last year, obviously drafted Ryan Rupert with one of them, took Scoot Henderson in the top 3. This team is already really young. They have a bunch of guys. They had Chris Murray as well, who they took last year in the 20s. They've got a bunch of young players. I just don't know if there's a real way that they can sit and handle and stay at picks number 7, 14, 34, and 40. So maybe they trade out, or maybe they move up and use some of that second round capital to get where you want. There's some real move up potential as well in this draft. I could see the Pistons at pick number 5 being willing to move down to number 7. I could also see pick number 11, the Chicago Bulls, being willing to move down to 14, and maybe you throw in picks 34 and 40 to do that, giving the Blazers 2 picks in the top 11 rather than in the top 14. And in this year's draft, with how it's structured, 2 top 11 picks I think is just a lot more valuable than 2 top 14 picks. I think there's a couple of players at 11 that would really be a difference maker compared to who you would get maybe hypothetically at pick 14, especially depending on who falls in this draft. That could be someone like a Cody Williams at pick number 11, which I'm sure Blazers fans would be stoked about. Moving up to pick number 5 could guarantee you someone as well that you might not get at number 7. It could get you a center like Donovan Clingan. I'm not sure that's the player they would go after, but there are a lot of different targets. And at pick number 7 here are some that I like. Matas Buzelis for the G League Ignite program, as well as Ron Holland from the G League Ignite program. I think one of the biggest things for Portland is you just need more wings. You need big, long, lengthy, athletic wings, and Buzelis and Holland both fit that profile. Ron Holland measured in extremely well at the NBA Draft Combine. He'll be a legitimate 6'8" with shoes on when he's playing out on the NBA court. So he's somebody with, again, that great downhill attack. Kind of reminds me in some ways of Shaedon Sharpe, but he's going to be a little bit more physical than Sharpe. probably not quite as athletic, but also does a good job finishing into contact. Needs to really grow as a playmaker and a shooter yet, so he's not the perfect, obvious, seamless fit into Portland's roster. But he is going to get to the free throw line. He's going to assert a lot of physical dominance, and I think for an upside swing at 7, he can make some sense. Buzelis is kind of your hybrid tweener forward, can probably guard threes, but maybe is best offensively as a power forward. So there's some unique fit things there with next to Jerami Grant or next to DeAndre Ayton. How does Buzelis kind of fit into that? He does have some playmaking feel though, and definitely has a lively handle for his position. So even though he doesn't have the quickest first step and isn't the best, most reliable shooter at this point, there is some real upside in his game. Donovan Cling and Stephon Castle, the two UConn guys, stand out to me as great options here. I know some Blazers fans are going to say, we don't need more guards. Well, Stephon Castle is huge. He's going to be like 6'7" with shoes on as a guard in the NBA. That's going to be very, very impressive. He's a fantastic defender. This is one of those players that if you get either Clingan or Castle, that's like a defensive transformational chess piece for this team, because Castle could be your elite point of attack defender, the guy you drape on the other team's best player night in, night out. And Donovan Clingan's got the anchor upside to him, where he's going to turn into somebody who can really block shots at the rim, turn people away from the rim. I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of being an anchor, is not only do you block shots, not only do you challenge shots at the rim, do you make people say no when they get to the paint? Do you turn them away from shooting at the rim and force kickouts and really keep teams from getting a lot of paint points? And I think that's what Donovan Clingan's going to be at the NBA level, someone who really just shuts off the paint, turns off other people's water. Clingan's an impressive prospect to me and someone I like a lot, even though Portland has a collection of bigs already. Clingan's very different than all of them, and I think could be a fantastic piece. Cody Williams, we highlighted a little bit earlier at pick number 7, maybe a little high. Some people see him going at like pick 10 to 12 range. At times I've mocked him higher than pick number 7 as well this year, though. I think there's a lot of upside in Cody Williams' game. I think he would be a perfect fit into what Portland's trying to build, to be honest with you. Dalton Knecht would be your shooter. It feels a little rich at pick number 7, though, for me. So at pick number 14, maybe we would see Dalton Knecht there. That's where moving up to pick 11, by the way, with Chicago would probably open up that possibility. I'm not sure Knecht falls all the way down to 14, but in the event that he did, he would be a fantastic get. But moving up to 11 probably gives you a better chance at landing him or another shooter in this draft, like Jared McCain from Duke. Otherwise, if you're looking for bigs, let's say at pick number 7, the Blazers go with a wing, someone like Cody Williams, or they go with Ron Holland or Matas Buzelis. Then at 14, that's when you come back, maybe look for someone with a little bit more size. Add to your front court talent with someone like Khalil Ware, who I think could have a real tremendous impact as a rookie. He's a two-year college player, really shined this past year for the Hoosiers after his kind of disappointing freshman season with the Oregon Ducks, where the coach just didn't give him the playtime or the run or the opportunity that I thought Ware deserved from an actual talent standpoint. And then he got to dominate in his second year of college basketball. Kyle Filipowski, kind of a tweener. I know Blazers fans probably won't want him 14th overall, but I do think he would be in play anywhere from about pick 13 to pick 20 in the NBA draft. And I think Filipowski is a player that I could see having some real upside in Portland as a fit, either next to some of Portland's already existing big men or as a center next to some bigger power forwards like a Jabari Walker or a Chris Murray, depending on how you wanted to look at it. Jared McCain we just highlighted as a shooter, but he does a little bit more than that. Not sure that the Blazers are going to take a guard in this year's draft, especially in the lottery, but it should just be best player available, in my opinion, for Portland. So if they could get McCain, who also shoots and I think fits around their other existing guards, he would be a really good get. Tidjane Salaün from Cholet also stands out as a high upside swing. He has all the athletic traits. Now, he doesn't shoot the ball extremely well. Mostly shoots it well from the top of the key. So that's where you're going to most often see your center play. So DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams. How does Tidjane Salaün fit into that? Does he shoot well from the corners? Not yet at this point. So there's going to be a lot of development necessary for Salaün to turn into the player a lot of people can see him becoming. But there is a lot of upside in his game. Tyler Smith, another player with upside. Pick 14 maybe feels a little rich for him, but he can shoot it. He's highly athletic, can get to the rim and finish. He's got, I think, an underrated handle for his position as well. He's not someone you're going to have create a ton of offense, but he can attack closeouts, face up, attack out of the mid-range, out of the mid-post, and have some success there. Picks 34 and 40. Now, this is really important. This is something I needed to highlight and touch on for Portland specifically. At this spot, you need to add talent and it's not necessarily upside. Now, drafting upside here in the second round could make some sense. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that at all, but I think adding safe, secure talent should be the foregone, most obvious decision for Portland. One of the biggest flaws with their roster, and this sounds really basic, this is rudimentary, elementary analysis. Their team's not very good. And while that sounds pretty obvious, and it sounds like, well, yeah, that's kind of the point, you don't want to be in a spot where you're taking all of these upside swings and praying that some of them, all of them, maybe one of them hit. I think it's very important, especially when you have a player who, in my opinion, like Scoot Henderson, will really blossom with talent around him, to use your draft assets to get players who can play in your rotation now and add to your existing roster. And for me, two players that really make a ton of sense: Baylor Shireman from Creighton, Adem Bona from UCLA. I think both of these guys can play real NBA minutes right now. You drop them in. Adem Bona can be a backup center on probably 20 of the 30 teams right now. And with his overall defensive flexibility, someone who can guard out on the perimeter a bit, you can use him to hedge, you can use him to blitz. I think there's a lot of flexibility with Bona, while also being a pretty good weak side rim protector. And then Baylor Shireman, he's been my darling of the 2024 NBA draft class. I loved him in the 2023 class. Had he stayed in it, he withdrew. I liked him even in the 2022 draft, but he was never really a part of that draft class. Shireman, to me, is somebody who has so much feel. He has a great outside shot. He shoots a ton of deep threes. If you're looking for a small forward, something Portland has perennially struggled to put around their star guard play, you think back to the entire Damian Lillard era. I mean, we were sitting there praying on Al-Farouq Aminu to be a great player for them. And Al-Farouq Aminu might have been one of the best wings Portland's had in the last decade and a half. Portland needs good wings who can shoot the ball, make plays off the dribble. Baylor Shireman does both of those things. He can handle in the pick and roll. He can play make downhill. He's a fantastic lob thrower, so if you paired him with another big man like an Adem Bona, there would be a lot of chemistry between the two of them already on offense. And then also, outside of just Shireman's ability to handle, he can fit out on the perimeter as an elite spot-up guy. He shoots well off of movement. He's a very easy, seamless fit onto a roster that just needs players who can flat out play basketball at a reliable, high level, because there's a really good chance that Ryan Rupert never turns into a quality NBA player. There's a chance that players on their current roster just never become good NBA players. Baylor Shireman, Adem Bona, to me, both seem like very safe bets to becoming good NBA players. Maybe they're not going to ever be stars, probably not, but there's a good bet that they turn into quality existing rotation players. I think Portland needs more of that. Now, if they do go some upside swings, there's some guys that I think make a lot of sense from a physical standpoint as well as a skill set standpoint. Trent Flowers, to me, played for the Adelaide 36ers. I've liked this kid's game all year long. Standing about 6'7", 6'8" with shoes on. He's going to be able to guard multiple positions. He's got the lateral quickness of a guard, so he's going to be able to guard point guards, he's going to be able to guard twos, but he's got enough size to probably guard up in the lineup as well, maybe guard some threes and fours. Fours are probably going to be very few and far between depending on the matchup. Like against Boston, I could see him trying to match up with Tatum and Brown at times, but more than likely you'd probably want him on Drew Holiday or Derek White in that type of setting. Kind of reminds me of a Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Flowers shot the ball very well for Adelaide this past year. On, albeit, yes, small volume, he still shoots the ball well. So I like his game. He's extremely athletic. Justin Edwards really started to grow and become comfortable in the back end of his Kentucky tenure. Beginning of the year, really struggled. Probably looked like a player who wasn't going to be a draft pick in the 2024 draft, but I kind of held my stock in him, looked at him as somebody who, with his overall pedigree, someone who was a high school recruit, and by the end of the year, he started to show that. He got comfortable in his role, became a better spot-up player, got more comfortable playing off the catch, attacking downhill, beating closeouts off the dribble. He's extremely athletic, very good physical body. He's got a strong frame to him already. I think there's a lot of muscle he can add on to that yet, and really grow into a good NBA player. So Trent Flowers, Justin Edwards are some of the upside swings I could see Portland taking, but Shireman and Adem Bona, players of that caliber, of that quality, should be what Portland really looks for at 34 and 40 if they do keep both of those picks. Now for the 2024 NBA free agency situation, the Portland Trail Blazers are projected way over the cap at negative $53 million in cap space this offseason. So the Blazers probably not going to be too active in NBA free agency. Now they could open up the mid-level exception if they made some deals on draft night, which I do think the Blazers could be active, like I've talked about, either trading up or using some of their existing veterans to make some trades. They could open up some money and really look for a way to add some other talent through free agency, but I'm just not expecting the Blazers to really do that this offseason. So let's look at some potential trade options, and Anfernee Simons is going to be one that everyone wants to know about. So he is our number one trade candidate here. Will the Blazers trade Anfernee Simons this offseason? Yes or no? And who would be interested? Ultimately, I'm not sure. I think this is going to be their big ticket item, the top option that they have on their roster, the one that most teams would love to pry away from Portland. Is Anfernee Simons going to be like Damian Lillard and find his way out of Portland? I'm less certain on that. Last year, as soon as the Blazers moved up in the lottery, I made a video talking about Damian Lillard trades because it just felt like a possible conclusion. Ultimately, he got moved in a deal to Milwaukee. Now Simons, the team that everyone loves to talk about is that Orlando Magic team. Does he return back to Orlando? Obviously from the area. I think Magic fans would love to have him. The cost for Anfernee Simons is going to be probably 2 first-round picks, plus a young player, plus some salary. And I think if Portland finds a way to pull something like that off, they're able to continue adding more young talent. This opens up probably some more flexibility with how they look to draft in the future, what type of talent they look to put around Scoot Henderson, as they really give Scoot Henderson the ball, tell him, you're our franchise guard, you're the guy we're going to put our trust in. It's a little risky at this point in time, it is, but I do think with the overall return, if they get a lot of good pieces and some young players that I think fit long-term there in Portland, it is worth moving Simons. I could also see New Orleans get involved. Remember, Utah was kind of a dark horse team a little bit for Damian Lillard. There were a lot of reports and rumors coming out that Danny Ainge was sniffing around Damian Lillard. Ultimately, no deal came to fruition. I'm sure the asking price from Utah's draft collection was probably just a little bit too rich for Ainge to land on and decide on, especially with Damian Lillard's age. This is where Anfernee Simons, who's going to cost a little bit less, he's quite a bit younger. This could make a good deal of sense for Utah to get involved in. Brooklyn, really a team that is lacking identity at this point. They also just don't have any good, reliable young point guard play. Anfernee Simons could be the main shot creator there in Brooklyn. Him and Cam Thomas could be a very electric, exciting backcourt. Probably not going to win you a ton of games, but it's going to put some fans in the seats to watch those two guys put the ball in the hoop. That's been an issue at the Barclays Center for a while now. The fan interest, the fan involvement is just not there. So bringing a young, exciting athlete, a young, exciting player like Anfernee Simons, who has a very great shot profile that I've highlighted multiple times in this video, could be a really good get for Brooklyn, and they have the draft assets to pull something off. Then the San Antonio Spurs as well. The Spurs are rumored to every single guard right now, to be completely honest with you. If I had to guess, Anfernee Simons is like number 7 on their list. They're probably more so looking at Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Darius Garland, just to name a few. We'll also talk about another guard that I think could land in San Antonio later in this video. So Anfernee Simons probably not the most realistic option for the Spurs, but I did think it was worth mentioning them. When we get to the second trade candidate, let's stay on the topic of San Antonio here. Malcolm Brogdon, I think, makes a lot of sense for the Spurs. A veteran point guard, someone who is used to running the show, having the ball in his hands. He's been a very productive and efficient offensive player for some time now in the league. And I think playing next to someone like Victor Wembanyama, Brogdon comes in and he knows how to utilize gravity to work as a scorer and as a facilitator, having that veteran presence. Honestly, somewhat reminiscent of what Andre Miller had done throughout his career for a bit, where you would just drop Andre Miller into a team, into a situation, and you would get good point guard play out of him. I think Malcolm Brogdon could bring that to San Antonio, but there's other teams that I think do make a good deal of sense. The Knicks were a team that was rumored to Brogdon for a long time. They have that Bojan Bogdanovic contract that they could look to trade. It's a short-term expiring contract going into this next offseason for Portland, so there's no long-term risk. The Knicks have picks 24 and 25 in this year's draft. Maybe you get one of those picks and Bogdanovic for Brogdon. I don't think that's bad. Now, I did talk about Portland having too many picks, too many young players right now, so that would require Portland to probably make another deal or to get a future asset from New York instead of a current one. I'm not sure if the Knicks would want to do that, though, because I'm sure they want to keep their trade flexibility alive and open, so maybe it would require a three-team trade, but I could see Portland and New York talking some Malcolm Brogdon deals this offseason. The Sixers, another team that I think could make a good deal of sense for Brogdon. They have all the cap space in the world. They could afford to bring in Brogdon's contract and use him as a backup guard off the bench behind Tyrese Maxey, a role that Brogdon has really, I think, lived into very well. The 1 year he did it in Boston, he was the sixth man of the year. So I think it would be a big swing get for Philadelphia. Memphis, I have them on the list as a potential buyer. They have some contracts that could line up with this, especially when you look at guys like Luke Kennard, Brandon Clark, a couple of names that financially could make some sense in some type of deal for Brogdon, although I don't think Memphis is very likely. And then Phoenix, they have a brand new head coach, Mike Budenholzer, who coached Malcolm Brogdon for a short while in Milwaukee. So the two of them are familiar. Now, obviously, Milwaukee did not retain Malcolm Brogdon when he went to Indiana in free agency, but I do think ultimately for Phoenix, if they looked at some of their flaws in the roster, point guard play was at the real heart of the dilemma, especially in the fourth quarters of games. Brogdon could be a really good get for them, someone who has his own scoring gravity, can exist off the basketball like he did in Milwaukee next to Giannis Antetokounmpo, but also still give you some real reliable point guard play around your big three. I think it would be a fantastic get for Phoenix. They have some contracts to match. We've seen these two teams work on deals before. I referenced the Nurkic and Ayton swap earlier. Maybe we would see something around Grayson Allen's contract. Maybe we'd see something back around Jusuf Nurkic's contract. Who really knows? But there are ways for Phoenix to get to Malcolm Brogdon's price point, and they have picked 22 in this year's draft. So they've got an asset to use, and it would be a very interesting move, to say the least. Then we look at trade candidate number 3. This is Robert Williams, someone who barely made his Blazers debut, and now Portland could look to trade him and cash in for some assets. Now, Chicago is a team to definitely watch for. They don't have any real reliable young center play. Nikola Vucevic is on the downswing of his career. Andre Drummond is a free agent. That was really the two bigs for Chicago this past year most frequently. Robert Williams, who would give them a different style of big man than either of those two guys. Someone who is very defensive oriented, a real rim protector, the Time Lord, one of the best shot blockers in the NBA, and I think could have a really drastic impact for Billy Donovan and a team that honestly I think just needs better defenders on the floor, especially better rim protectors, guys who can close down the paint a little bit more effectively. Williams a lot more athletic than Vucevic, and it just gives them a completely different style player, an above the rim lob finisher as well. I think could just really be awesome there in Chicago with Kobe White, and giving them just more rim presence, more athletic traits on the floor. Then you have someone like Phoenix again. The Suns are going to be rumored around a lot of players. I think the Robert Williams trade makes a lot more sense for Phoenix than the Brogdon one. Even though the Suns really need a point guard, I still think they need even more rim protection. I think that if you look at how they had to guard Minnesota last year with Frank Vogel, they just did not have a center to help protect the paint enough. Jusuf Nurkic isn't scaring anyone down there. Robert Williams brings more of that rim protection, and he's on a cheaper contract as well, which makes it easier for Phoenix to go out and acquire him. Again, pick 22 could be in play there. The Lakers have pick number 17, and the team that they've really struggled to beat over the last few years has been the Denver Nuggets, getting one more big body, one more shot blocker, rim protector to probably hide on Aaron Gordon. You put Anthony Davis on Nikola Jokic. You have Robert Williams guarding Aaron Gordon. It allows him to act as a roamer, a shot blocker. You get to send freer doubles at Jokic and hope that that has a greater impact on him and gives you a better chance at beating Denver, a team that has just had the Lakers number. And the reality is, even with the Mavericks in the finals, the Wolves eliminating the Nuggets, to get to the finals, you're probably going to have to go through Denver at some point. It just seems like. And if you don't have to go through Denver, you have to go through the team that beats Denver, which means probably more size anyway. So Robert Williams can have a really nice impact. Again, the Lakers have pick 17 to work with in a deal, so we'll see what happens there. Then the Kings, another kind of dark horse team that I could see getting involved in some names. For a while now, it's been rumored that the Kings want a real rim protector on the floor. Now, I don't think Robert Williams should start next to Domantas Sabonis. I don't think that's how you maximize Sabonis. That's not how you maximize Robert Williams, in my opinion. But I do think he could be a really good backup big man for Sacramento. If he takes the trip down the West Coast, goes from Portland to Sacramento, he could be a very nice 20-minute a game off the bench big man for Sacramento in the event he stays healthy. I know someone's going to comment about, oh, Robert Williams is never healthy. I mean, yes, you're right, but at the same time, you can't just rule him out as a good player or as an asset because he's had some injury concerns in the past, because that's very, I think, retrospective thinking. You have to be forward thinking in deals, and if you do get Robert Williams to be healthy for a season or two, we saw how great he could be for Boston when they made their run to the finals a few years ago. He could have an awesome impact. Now, I'm not saying he's going to push any of these teams to the finals, but he could be a real positive addition for them for sure. Then trade candidate number 4, Jerami Grant. You knew he was going to be on this list. The Blazers have this collection of veteran players that they should or could look to trade. Jerami Grant is someone I would be aggressively looking to move if I was Portland, because you owe him a lot of money long term. After a very good shooting season, a season where there was some disappointment for how the year ended for a good number of teams, maybe Jerami Grant could be looked at as a valuable addition. Someone like Oklahoma City, you get another rim protector in Jerami Grant, but most importantly, someone who has shot the ball really well. So compared to Lou Dort, Josh Giddey, teams that, players that teams have sagged off of, Jerami Grant could maybe be a little bit more of a reliable floor spacer. Now, his price point, I just can't see Sam Presti bringing him back to Oklahoma City where he started his career. I like Jerami Grant a lot when he was with the Thunder originally, because he just kind of came in as this big-time athletic shot blocker, just made a bunch of defensive plays. And I think if he scaled his role down to a team that had more offensive talent like OKC does, maybe you could get some of those big positives back out of his game more consistently, more reliably. OKC, though, I just don't really see as the option. Sacramento, listen, Jerami Grant costs a lot of money. I'm just not sure if the Kings have the real pathway to getting there, to affording him. To get a deal done, you'd probably have to trade both Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter. Just feels like you're subtracting out of your rotation at that point, trading 2 for 1, in my opinion. I would not do a Jerami Grant trade if I was Sacramento. Memphis, I wouldn't make a trade for Jerami Grant either, although I could see them looking at Jerami Grant as like another bigger wing to put on the floor next to Jaren Jackson Jr. I wouldn't do that. Philadelphia, the reason they're on this list is in the event that they strike out in free agency. Someone like, you think about, not getting Paul George, maybe they don't land anyone in free agency. Maybe they strike out on Klay Thompson. Maybe they strike out on Paul George. They don't even get to talk to Pascal Siakam because maybe he just signs an extension with Indiana immediately. Like, the Sixers might just walk out of this as the biggest losers of free agency. In that event, maybe Daryl Morey panics, makes some type of move for Jerami Grant to say, hey, look, we got Jerami Grant. Now, does that move you to an Eastern Conference title? Probably not. But I could see them doing that. Denver is also a team that would be kind of a dark horse team to watch for. Again, Jerami Grant's money is probably the biggest limiting factor in all of this. OKC probably doesn't do it because of the money. Sacramento probably doesn't do it because of the money. Denver probably doesn't do it because of the money. But in the event that, the Nuggets are looking at themselves internally and rewatching that Wolves series, they probably say, we just didn't have enough shooting on the floor. And even though Aaron Gordon's been such a great fit next to Nikola Jokic, like, would Jerami Grant's shooting be more valuable out of the corner than Aaron Gordon's cutting? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. I would rather have Aaron Gordon than Jerami Grant, to be completely honest, especially at the price points and everything. But could Denver talk themselves into something like that? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to say that they would. Ultimately, I do think Jerami Grant will be back in Portland next year, but I would be shopping him as much as humanly possible if I was Portland. So when it comes to next season, what is my outlook for them? I think Scoot, most importantly, is going to take a notable step forward. I think he's going to build off of the end of this rookie season, and I think he's going to emerge as a quality player next year. His rookie season, he was not a high-quality player at all. He's a young guard. He struggled. But I think going into next year, he's going to establish himself, and people are going to start to see why he was a top 2, top 3 level pick in a loaded draft class, because he has a lot of playmaking feel. He just moves like an all-star guard. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot. People are going to say, oh, who cares how he moves if he can't shoot? I think the shot's going to come around. I think he's going to build some confidence in himself. I think the more success he finds early next year, the better for his long-term career, and I think that step is going to be very notable. The roster is still going to be young and bad, but there's going to be some noticeable progression across the roster. I think Anfernee Simons is going to continue to take small steps forward, assuming he's back in Portland next year. I think Jabari Walker and Chris Murray just become a little bit more dependable, a little bit more reliable. Hopefully DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams both stay healthy if they're both there in Portland. Who knows about Matisse Thybulle? I don't see any more progression from him, to be honest with you. But then Shaedon Sharpe's really the big one. If Shaedon Sharpe can stay healthy, stay on the floor, the sky is really the limit for him, especially with the way that he jumps. Like, that's not even, like, it's both figurative and literal, because he jumps just so incredibly high that he's basically touching the sky. So I think for Portland, they've got a lot of the right young pieces in place. It's about who they draft, how the team kind of comes together as a fit, and how each individual player takes meaningful steps forward, not only in their skill sets, but in their conditioning and in their defensive abilities, because that's going to be one of the limiting factors as well for Portland winning a lot of games, is can they actually build a quality competitive defense? So far they haven't been able to. They're going to likely be vying for a top pick again in the 2025 draft. Remember, that's where you could see a guy like Ace Bailey, Cooper Flagg, who's my front runner right now to be the #1 overall pick. But there's some other talented players as well. VJ Edgecombe, who's a guard. There's a lot of quality players in the 2025 draft coming up. A few other guards. Traore's having a great France run right now. Just a lot of talent. Dylan Harper, a lot of talent in 2025. So the Blazers have a lot of flexibility going into that draft likely, and the rebuild continues from there. Thank you all so much for watching. Really did enjoy covering the Blazers in this video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.